Good evening, I'm Jeff Salkin. Welcome to Your Money in Business. We begin tonight with a generational change in the workplace. How will businesses adapt? We spoke with organizational psychology expert Elliot Lasson. What are the challenges with young people joining the workforce?
Well, I'm not sure which generation I'm representing, but the truth is, Jeff, that there are a few different generations operating in the workplace. Without getting into too much of the history of the discussion of generations in the workplace, suffice it to say that there are different generations that have to get along, that have to communicate with one another, and the communication style of the emerging generations, whether it's the millennials or what is known now as the Gen Zs that are coming up through the ranks, there are different communication patterns, there are different communication standards, and I think it's important to recognize that. Each generation needs to do that.
The people you're teaching these days, the millennials have moved off campus and it's the Generation Z?
The Generation Zs are probably the ones that are in high school getting into college right now. Generally speaking, my students are at the graduate level, so they're already working professionals, and I would say that they're more in the millennial generation.
So what do they do from a language standpoint that's different, and how is it a challenge?
Well, I would say one area is really the decision of which channel to use for that language. Because there are multiple options there. The digital channel tends to be the channel of choice for the millennial and certainly the Generation Z individuals. And people that are in the baby boomer generation as well as the Gen Xers are more used to phone conversation, they're more used to face-to-face conversation, and perhaps email. The emerging generations are into texting, and as such, that changes the boundaries of communication a bit.
So they show up at the office and wonder, what is this thing on the desk with all the buttons on it and a handset? Well, what is that used for?
Yeah, that's an interesting observation that a lot of millennials prefer not to use that phone, even if it's making a phone call on their cell phone. I think that the art of the spoken word has been lost to some extent, and as we know, with our voice and with our emotions, and I'm not talking about emoticons and emojis, our voice conveys a certain tone and message, and to some extent that has been lost.
How do they do with professionalism? You hear complaints that the new generation is not really into showing up on time and putting in a solid 8 or 9 hours. Mm-hmm. To what extent is that something real, or is it these young whippersnappers sort of complaint that's been around forever?
Well, I think that when it comes to, let's say, attendance and timeliness, I think what older generations, really just to be fair, have to understand that the millennials and the other younger generations are doing things that are after hours, for example, where they have access to their email, they have access to things that are in the workplace, and they may in fact be doing work, productive work, at times when we generally don't think of them doing work, because the older generations tend to live in a kind of a 9-to-5 setting, where when you go home you kind of turn everything off and leave your briefcase at the door, when in fact millennials may have been doing work after hours. Now that said, Jeff, I think that millennials have to also understand that there are certain expectations of being on time, because at the end of the day, or at the beginning of the day, the individuals that are in the Gen X or the baby boomers are going to depend on those individuals to be there.
But that is the future. I mean, to what degree is the workplace changing where work is changing? And as you say, it can be around the clock and 7 days a week instead of 5 days. Just a 40-hour work week still makes sense. Does it make sense a decade from now?
I think that the 40-hour work week, in terms of number of hours, the quantity of the hours, I think that does make sense. And I also think that it's important to get into outcome-based work rather than just punching in and punching out, because what is most important is accomplishing tasks and finishing deliverables in a timely manner. So I would say that the distribution of those 40 hours, I think that people in older generations need to understand that there might be some different distributions of those 40 hours over the work week that might also make sense.
The other point I wanted to make, and tell me if you agree, is that there's a benefit to this. Like all forms of diversity, workplaces shouldn't shy away from having a variety of age groups represented. There's strength in that. There's energy from that. Mm-hmm.
Well, especially if you're talking about companies that are selling products or services to younger individuals, it makes sense to have that representation in the workplace. Similarly, a company that sells products or services to generations that are earlier generations, I think that they also have value in resonating with those cohorts.
Very good. Elliot Lasson, UMBC, sir, thank you very much.
You're welcome.